Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Joe Emilio Show. This is panel evening, and I'm joined by the Manpatria crew, ladies and gentlemen. If you missed the first half with me and Duma, well, too bad. You can watch it in replay. But I'm now with the Manpatria team, Dumo and Koketsu and Nzuzu. Nzuzu, by the way, thank you so much for joining. It's the first time you're on my show, and I'm grateful that you're here. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, man. I've watched so many of the Manpatria streams, and it really is awesome to have you with us. So I just wanted to say that, and then
Thanks, and appreciate it. Um,
cool, awesome.
yeah, man. I think this thing is also behind for a bit.
Yeah, there
Um,
is a somewhere on
or
your
is it just me?
side. There's an up and down arrow. Wait, up and down arrow. You should see it somewhere. And then if you click that, it's going to
Yes,
switch
I see
views,
it.
but it will fix the
hmm
lag. Should fix the lag.
Okay. Okay.
Cool. Ladies
Cool,
and
cool, cool.
gentlemen,
Thanks, man.
no worries. All right. And Kaketsu and Duma, as always, it's great to have you back on the show. Look, I proposed this topic to Duma, and I said, would the Manpatria crew like to talk about it? He said yes. I'm not too sure what to expect, but we will. I will handle this topic with sensitivity, of course. But I do want to talk about it because I think it's something that people do talk about in their when they're having brides together or whatever it might come up. But I don't think anybody's talking about this openly enough anyway. So the question is, does black privilege exist, which is basically the opposite of white privilege? And I know that some people are going to have a heart attack with me just even saying that, but calm down. It's a question. I'm just asking a question. And I would really like to know your guys' opinion. In my opinion, I think it does. Ooh, I've gotten in trouble now. But someone's going to clip that. I'm going to be in so much trouble. But yeah, who would like to get a crack at it first? Should we start with Koketsu? I want to hear your view on this. Just in, I don't know, just let us have it. What do you think? Do you think it exists?
Okay, so maybe let's rewind. I think privilege is definitely a thing. There's certainly no one who wouldn't say privilege as a concept or privilege at large doesn't exist. So when we now talk of privilege, we can then get into the finer details of, effectively race-based privilege. And I want to use that term race-based privilege because it is privilege that is effectively is awarded to individuals, collectives of people, etc based on race. And then when we draw down further from privileged, remember we start off at privilege, we go into race-based privilege, and then when we drill down even further and start saying, right, now you start naming the races, and you then look at privilege from that perspective. Based on that, it is not incorrect to then say that black privilege does exist. So I'll make an example. Our current employment equity laws are the perfect textbook example of black privilege. That is, if you are black, you are privileged enough to effectively be first in line or cut the line when it comes to economic policy. That is, yeah, an offshoot of affirmative action. That is a form of privilege. You know, it means that irrespective of who you are, the skill set you bring in, and so forth, by virtue of you being black, you get to receive an advantage of some sort, and that is a privilege that others who are not black don't have. So that's a form of privilege, of course, much in the same way that if you're the guy with the lovely car, you get to have certain privileges. That is, ladies look your way more often than if you didn't have the lovely car. Rinse and repeat. If you smell good, dress good, speak well, etc., etc. That is a form of privilege. So based on that, we can't not say that black privilege does exist. And I'm using the very basic example of employment equity laws in the Republic of South Africa, and it's very difficult to argue then that it doesn't exist, even if you come off the side or by mentioning things, what's the word they use, restorative justice, etc. It may be restorative justice in one person's perspective, but then you have to say that that restorative justice applies privilege aka black privilege, to reach its outcome or to achieve its goals. So yeah, it definitely does exist, and anyone who wants to argue against that, to me at least, will find it very difficult to.
All right, I think that's a good place to start. But I think another thing that maybe we should also mention is like maybe we should define what white privilege is and black privilege is. So, Dumo, do you want to get a crack at the definitions, or should I Google quickly?
Yeah, I say I think you should Google it because I don't want to
Google isn't always
misrepresent
reliable,
myself.
though. So, I mean, asking you guys is probably more credible than Google, to be honest. Let's see, white privilege. Okay, now white privilege forgiveness comes up. Um, definition. Okay, so according to Google, all right, again, it's Google. Um, Inherent advantages possessed by a white person on the basis of their race in a society characterized by racial inequality and injustice. Okay, Dumo, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think you're right, Joe, when you said that sometimes Google gets the wrong definition. I think that definition is wrong. White privilege is not dependent, in my opinion. It's not dependent on inequality. It's dependent on what advantages you are given because of the color of your skin. So that's the issue. So, and that's the same thing that Koketsu mentioned now with regards to black privilege. If you look at the Employment Equity Act, it does put black people at the head of the lines of white people. And one could even say, even during apartheid, there was white privilege because there were certain jobs that were reserved for whites and so forth and so forth. So I don't like that Google definition. I think it's not intuitive enough. That's the thing. I mean, I can understand if a definition is not intuitive, but again, it shouldn't go way off the rails. You know what I mean? Like, it shouldn't try to add its own thing there. Like, for example, I mean, if you look at the definition of racism, for example, and then you'll find that a lot of people say racism requires power. And we all know that it doesn't, but they just put it there because they're trying to conveniently leave out a certain race out of being defined as being racist as well. So I disagree with that definition. I tend to lean to what Koketo says. It's the advantages and privileges that you have given your skin color, and I think by a government or something like that, or it can be a company as well. But I mean, or any organization.
Would
But
you,
sometimes it.
would you,
Mhm.
sorry. Would you say that, okay, let's take the definition of privilege and take out the white, and then out there read it as it is, which means it's a special right, advantage, or immunity, advantage, and an underlying advantage granted or available to only a particular person or a group. Let's say, for example, as a result of socioeconomic circumstances, such as yeah, when people go to get a loan from a bank, it's much more difficult for a black person to get a loan from a bank as compared to a white person. Those are the statistics. Now, would you say that that's a privilege that is granted to white people, and that's white privilege? I'm asking. Just playing devil's advocate.
Oh, okay. I would say I would answer and just say no, because the bank is not rejecting them because they of their skin color. The bank would be rejecting them because of their affordability. That's the reality. It's not now. Yes, there was apartheid, and yes, it did put a lot of people on the back foot. But when the bank checks if someone can afford, they're going to look at what money is going into the account, how much money it is, and if it's not enough, then they're going to reject you and say, "Well, you can't afford the loan." So yes, it could be that there's a disparity at the end of the day, but a disparity does not necessarily mean that there's some sort of like advantage. In fact, what about I'm pretty sure if you had to look among whites, let's just look at whites specifically, who there are probably white people who do get rejected for loans as well. Then what privilege do they have over each other? Is it racial, or is it because of where they live? Is it because of where they of what they do, or whatever. I would just say it's the money that goes into the bank account. But yes, if you look at the disparity, you can draw the line across the races, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that disparity exists because of race. And I think that's, we have to be very careful of that. So, yeah, so I wouldn't say that white people have an inherent advantage over black people when it comes to getting a loan from the bank. But I would say that, look, if you do have a lot of money, you do have an advantage over someone who doesn't have money in getting a loan. That's what I would say. That's the advantage, is how much money you have, not because of your skin
Look, I
color.
want to
Because if
piggyback.
it was because of your skin, go ahead, Kuketsu, go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I wanted to piggyback off that by, if you look at, maybe let's step away from the money talk and the economics talk, etc. Let's now move it to sports teams. Ever notice how if a white guy who isn't selected for, let's say, the cricket team, if they're not selected, everyone quickly assumes then that no, it is because he lacks the skill or he's not the best person in that position, etc., etc. But soon as a black guy is not selected, nowadays, very quickly you'll hear those coming off, off the fringes coming out then saying that he's not being selected because he's black. So black privilege also means being afforded the benefit of the doubt in instances where such benefit doesn't actually be warranted. An unskilled black player not being selected for a team um, creates a scenario where questions are asked based on their skin color, of course. But a white guy who isn't selected, an Indian guy who isn't selected, a colored guy who isn't selected, they don't get the same privilege if they're not selected for the same team in the same sport, for example. So that's another example of black privilege. I know we like to use the money talk really because everyone kind of leans towards that, but even outside economic circumstance, such as the sports field, it still applies even there.
Oh,
Okay.
and one more thing, sorry, Nzuzo. It'll be quick. So I'm not. I just wanted to make it clear to the audience. I'm not saying that white or black privilege does not exist. We're just saying that in many circumstances there are other elements that can explain the disparity among race. Yeah,
Go ahead, Nzizi.
besides race.
Okay, no, I was gonna say that I think white, yeah, I think that white, as Jumbo just said, now white and black privilege does exist in different circumstances, and it's sometimes it's not down to the fact that you are white. It's just as a result of other circumstances being or other reasons being at play in the situation. I take for example in the legal fraternity when they ask you to be when they ask candidate attorneys to have a car for purposes of getting or for being likely to be hired as a candidate attorney at a law firm. And you most likely gonna find that it's white people who are gonna have cars as opposed to black people. Because as explained by Dumo, it's not necessary as a result of you being white, but it's as a result of other factors being at play. But you can you can interpret it as being white privilege in a sense that yes you are, it's not necessarily because you're white, but it results in mostly white people having that opportunity to get the job. At the end of the day it can be interpreted as that, in my opinion. I've seen not necessarily I've seen, but I think that both privileges exist. I think that obviously with black privilege, it exists even on paper. We see it with BE laws. We even see it with quotas. We see it, and we also see it off of paper, such as when the SAHRC, the South African Human Rights Commission, goes after white people when they're accused of being racist, as opposed to kids that are videotaping themselves saying that they don't like white people, and yet they still don't have any person or any institution going after them. That's black privilege. I think that sometimes you can say you can say the same thing about white privilege, but it's obviously some, as I've said, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's as a result of you being white. It's just a result of other circumstances being at play at the time. So yeah, that's just what I think.
Mm.
But you can. It's an open-ended debate For yeah, I don't ever, I don't. For also like for another thing I also want to say is that don't we always want privilege in a sense? You
Well,
know, don't we always work
Yeah.
towards people having privilege? I mean, you know, we want our kids to have the privilege to go to a school which we previously couldn't go because we didn't have the cash. So it's quite difficult to say I'm not necessarily I'm against privilege because it's what I work hard for every single day to provide to my family. The privilege to be
yeah,
able to go to Woolworths as opposed to ShopRite, you know, and no offense to obviously ShopRite, but nonetheless, you know,
it
have
is what it is.
that option. Yeah, yeah, exactly. It is what it is.
Um. Sure.
Sorry, and Zuzu, I just want to ask you because you brought up a good point there about what people can say and what people can't say. In my opinion, I think Julius has a lot of black privilege because he can say those things like with the EFF versus AfriForum that we saw. He said these horrible, horrible things. But I always ask, like, okay, so what if a white person was saying that, or an Indian person, or an Asian person? You know, imagine the outrage that would have just overcome the entire South Africa. I mean, we saw outrage with the clicks ad. So, would you say that that's another form of black privilege?
Yeah, yeah, I would say that's a form of black privilege. I think that look, I'm not saying that. Yeah, it's a it is a form of of black privilege. It's just that I don't want to necessarily say that it's always going to be a case. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be black privilege in a sense. Sometimes you know tables can change where it could also be white privilege if there was a if it was a apartheid. I'm just saying that you know sometimes it's just an open-ended debate, and I don't want to go continuously talking about it because at the end of the day, it doesn't solve the issue that we have at hand. And it's like a leftist argument. It's an open-ended thing. We're gonna keep on going, such as racism. You know, there's always gonna be racism because you know there's different types of discrimination that can result in racism, such as I'm having to I don't date Indians. No offense to Indians, no necessary, but I just don't find them attractive. You know, stuff like that. You know? So that's just what I think. But nonetheless, yeah, he has definitely has black privilege. Let's talk about the fact that, like I said, you know, we just saw a video of a young girl from St. Mary's talking about how much she doesn't like white people, and then after that, there's no outrage in that sense to what she says. I think that that's black privilege in of itself. Um, I think also, for example,
Oh,
the
sorry,
ability to
Zuzo.
see huh? Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. So she never got any flack because she was black.
Yes, yes, she
Just,
never got any
I'm just
flag.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, I don't
Sorry
think
to
that she
interrupt.
got any flag because she was black. Um, shit, now I even lost my train of thought.
Sorry, man. Sorry. I apologize.
No, no, but yeah, I think that black privilege does exist, and it exists sometimes also exists. I think with the pure with good intentions in the sense that we're trying to obviously, you know, correct. Um, this was kind of handle the spice. That's a good one, Beth.
Yeah,
But
I'm gonna let you finish, and then I'm gonna counter you, Nzuzo.
Okay, cool.
yeah, you can counter now, quick. So I just can't get this comment out of my mind right now. It's quite
Yeah,
funny.
sorry, I don't know if you guys
No,
can see, but Behave, one of the viewers said that Nzuzu just can't handle the spice Indians bring. That's why. Yes.
Okay, so you can speak. You can
I don't
speak now.
think that's behave. I think that's Bavesh or Bhavna or
Maybe.
Yeah,
That's Bav. Yeah, Bav.
Yeah,
Bav.
yeah.
I call
Anyway,
him Behave. Anyway, Kuketsu, go ahead.
Yeah, Nzuzo, you said sometimes that there's what you said it exists. There's good in there's, yeah. You said something that it can bring some semblance of good or something like that. You're saying,
no, no, no. I was saying that sometimes it can
am
as
I
it can
right in
exist as a
assuming that's
no. Let me correct myself if I said it wrong. I said that it can exist as a result of the policymakers or the legislature legislature having good intentions. But of course, I'm not going to take away the fact that the results do not meet the intentions, but it can exist as a
Okay.
result of people having the pure intentions to do right against people who've been wronged.
So here's the problem with that, right? If you look at a professional space, talking now about a professional workspace, and I'll use this example because I think it's maybe a more mature example than the whole debate around hair in schools, etc. But in a professional workspace, I think everyone does understand what looking presentable basically means. It's as ubiquitous as explaining right from wrong. We all know what it is. It doesn't need a manual. It doesn't need a standard operating procedure or anything of that sort. But there's also a semblance of black privilege in that when someone rocks up with hair that looks like Mbuyiseni Quinton Ndlozi's hairstyle, and a beard that doesn't connect and looks like a half-grown patch of grass, for example. That's not a professional look. It's not. But black privilege also means that he can get away and say that no, this is the natural look. This is how our, this is how we naturally are, and this thing of fetching a comb is something that was basically introduced by colonialists who wanted to impose order by discriminating against black people, etc. You know, the problem with that level of black privileges, by extension, what people are effectively saying is that in the absence of such rules or such societal standards, black people are a potent mess, even when it comes to their grooming. And for me, that's bigotry. But black privilege means people get to say these things and even get away with it. Or the whole Zuleika Patel situation when she was still a high schooler. I don't care who says what. That was too much hair. And even in a black community in the most rural of rural South Africa, even then the principal won't even allow you to wear that as your hairstyle. In fact, in rural South Africa, you get a hiding. There's no, hey, child rights. You get a hiding for having that much hair. Your parents get called in. Even the community will shun you as a parent for allowing your child to go to school looking like that. That is what it is. But black privilege means you get to do that, and the moment you get called out for it, be it by a school constitution, be it by general work standards or managers telling you to look more presentable. Black privilege means you can quickly turn around and say that you are actually discriminating against me, and not just myself, but discriminating against people of color at large, because this is how this is an acceptable way to look in a professional setting, and that's not necessarily the case. Even the white guy has to comb his hair every day and groom his beard, etc., etc. These things aren't specifically created to target or discriminate against black people. It's a way of saying that we need to maintain a standard that goes across the board, irrespective of the color of your skin. But somehow, there are people who want to exercise black privilege and effectively make themselves the exception to the rule under the pretense of black privilege again.
Can I say one thing?
Go ahead.
One thing I just want to just mention as well is that I think I like the examples that Nzuzo and Koketso are bringing up, because these happen like in social interactions. You know what I mean? I think, when I look at privilege, especially when you talk about white and black privilege, I always limit it to legislation. Reason why I do that is because of the fact that as a libertarian, I don't think the government should put laws in place that discriminate one race over the other. So I would say that because I define it in that sense, I would say that if someone say does white or black privilege exist, in present day South Africa, I'd say black privilege exists because of the BEE and the Equity Act and so forth. And again, in apartheid, I would also say white privilege existed. But now, if we had to remove all these racist laws, I would say white and black privilege does not exist. However, I think Koketso and Zuzo brought up, like, what about these social interactions? Like, for example, when a black person does not get selected for a team, they say, oh, it's racism. But when it's a white person, people go and say, people don't say anything, right? And then the question with the hair as well. I think that is the question, perhaps maybe that people want answered, is really the social interactions. But I think that it kind of also depends on the individual. So if I view a situation, let's say I see Zuleika Patel, right? And then she's got long hair, and I go, whatever, leave it alone. You know what I'm saying? But another person says, no, 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 hair is long. It needs to be cut. You know, that type of thing, right? Now, I think in that type of situation, would the only challenge I would have rather is that, does Zuleika have privilege? Let's say, for example, um, if one person says she must cut it and the other one says she doesn't, does that privilege exist? Even if she ends up not covering her, not cutting her hair. So I know that's a bit of a curve ball, but in the social interactions, I think it's much more difficult to say whether if white. So I say it's much more difficult to say whether if white or black privilege exists in those social situations. But that's not to say that it doesn't. It's just that it's hard to spot it. That's what I would say. Yeah, just given what those
Interesting.
guys said. Yeah.
Did anybody want to rebuttal on that or add to that?
No, I'm good. No, no,
I
no,
think
I'm
Koketsu
good.
would disagree with me there.
Well, I was kind of waiting for
I don't know,
Kaketsu to say something.
Koketsu, I know you're gonna disagree with me here. What is it? I need to know.
Not necessarily. Look, I mean, I do agree with you mostly. It is very difficult in a societal setting to actually lay down a lot of these rules. But well, I'm not as egalitarian as I thought I am, but yeah, I do agree with the principle that it is absolutely wrong to create laws that specifically outline groups of people and set aside a subset of rules for them. And so if you use the hair example, right? If you say long hair is long hair, right? And the problem I have is you have people who then say, no, in my culture this isn't considered long hair. That's you basically saying that, no, I demand you set aside me, and introduce a new subset of rules for me to appease me and my culture. And that's not exactly how that's not exactly equality. That creates a you versus them, rules for me and not for you. Therefore, it's privilege.
Okay. Um, I will not disagree with that. I think you laid it right. You laid it out well there.
Yeah,
I think that's a clear example.
it's getting interesting now because I did want to get into the social aspect of it, because I think that's where things like it's touchy in a way, but at the same time, like I don't know how to say this, but I think the best way to kind of explain what I'm trying to get at is like I googled if Google has a definition for black privilege. It doesn't. It just comes up with articles of stuff like random articles, CNN, like the one headline from 2016 says it's time to talk about black privilege. That was in 2016. That's about it. Like there's no, when you Google white privilege, there's a definition clear as day at the top, but with black privilege it isn't. And I think do you guys think that as part of this, what's going on in society right now, one of the things that it feels like, I don't know if it's the left or if it's society itself, is saying like you can't say black privilege. That you just can't say that. You know what I mean? Because of how touchy it is. Okay, so you can go ahead with that.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of it just as you brought it up. Look, I don't like how we got here, firstly, and I'll make the example of, I remember when ABSA launched their Africanacity rebrand slash campaign, etc. And then on their social media, they posed the question of what does black tax mean to you? Something along those lines. And people lost their minds. Why? Because even when it comes to discussing some of these things, right, you have people who genuinely believe that, some conversations should not be had, that some conversations are the exclusive domain to only be discussed by people of a certain color. It goes hand in hand with how people treat their inward, how some people are allowed to say it but others aren't allowed to say it. It creates a class of us versus them. So I don't like how society actually got here. And it's gotten to the point where we can't even talk about these things anymore, because the moment you're not black, people assume that you cannot speak on black issues. But that's not really the case. I mean, I've got a financial advisor who isn't black, and I remember on one of our early interactions, he asked me straight up when it comes to my how my money looks, where my money goes, and he did ask that. Look, I know black tax is a thing, so let's have that conversation. Is it a thing for you? How much goes into this? So he can offer financial advice that factors it in. As a non-black person, it didn't matter. As a financial advisor, it did. Now imagine I then come out and say, "How can you say such a thing?" That conversation around how much black tax I pay or don't pay should not be discussed with someone who's non-black. It would be foolish, right? So it's very foolish to then exclude these things in our societal conversations. In fact, all that does is it just stagnates society when it comes to some of these issues. And you can see that people have actually stagnated in their views, that they can't even have these conversations. They want to have conversations about everything else. You can have conversations about whether children, whether boys are boys and girls are girls, but you don't want to have conversation about whether something like black privilege or black tax, etc., should exist. Come on, I find that immature. Actually, I mean, we're all adults here, hopefully, so we should be able to have meaningful discussions in as a way of actually bettering ourselves and potentially bettering even our communities by virtue of having a better understanding based on other people's understanding and definitions. But yeah.
No, eloquently put. Zizu, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, man. Go kids already touched on the heart of it. But yeah, man, black people. I think everyone knows, or everyone has seen now, particularly in the West, and I do also consider South Africa as a westernized country in a sense. Black people are really a protected group, and once you poke the bear, shit start hitting the fan, and that's the issue that Coquettes are really talking about. You can't even have real conversations with with people in this group because they just become sensitive when you try to really tell them the truth of the circumstances and really try to help them. And when I say even black people, black women are even worse. You cannot criticize them. You cannot criticize. I mean, if you see someone who's overweight, bruh, like, bruh, and I say I don't like overweight chicks, dude, I don't like overweight chicks. I'm not being fat phobic. I just like like and that's the issue, like you trying to make facts to the matter, and they just try to really just kick you out the debate on based on feelings over facts. They try to sing to your morals rather than the facts of the matter. At the end of the day, we know that as a result of um, social welfare, black people have become entitled ever since social welfare has been put into the system. And speaking about that, really sets off the black activists, the weed selling disease and stuff, and people like that, and people of a similar nature. And it's difficult to really solve the issue because everyone wants to hear what they like rather than what the truth is. And the difficulty in that is that we don't solve no issues, we don't solve no problems, we don't um, we don't get to the crux of the issue, which is that you can't that the social welfare system is unsustainable. It cannot help you. You're not going to be better off with it because at the end of the day, you're still earning 350 as compared to 1,000 rand, which is of course more. You're still earning way more you're still earning way more when you actually work for somebody as compared to being on the social welfare. Plus, the more people that get on social welfare, the less people who actually pay taxes, which then means that it will become unsustainable because those people cannot afford the tax that is required of us to pay. Therefore, they just leave a country or they move their assets across the borders because at least then they're not taxed as heavily um, as they would be in South Africa. Therefore, The money leaves for purpose. The money that is required for service delivery is not there. Energy. I can go on and on and on. But if I can't even tell you, if if I just tell you that you are entitled as a result of you being mollycoddled by the government by way of the social welfare system and also the BEE and also employment equity and all that stuff, you know, it blows their mind, and that's why you'll see people going having being outraged in respect of the Tremese ad, the clicks ad, which it literally was, for a week or two, the only thing that people were talking about, and the outrage was just out of this world, as compared to um, as compared to a child that's saying that she doesn't like white people. I mean, if your child is saying such things, I'll be a bit scared. Like, imagine my child coming home and saying that I don't like John that I see every day. I'll be like, dog. So what are you gonna do about that? What, are you gonna whip his ass? You gonna kill him? It's a bit scary. It's a bit scary when you hear such things coming out of a child's mouth, and we don't want to address it. And if I was saying these type of things back in the day, I'd be getting a hiding. I'm not. Why are you causing such trouble? That's what my dad would say. Well, my mom would say, why you wanna be why you wanna be famous in regards to making a ruckus rather than actually being famous in regards to doing well at school. And back in the day, people would actually get, kids would actually get reprimanded for these type of antics. Nowadays, you have parents who are part of SGPs that are literally pushing this agenda. And when you tell them that their causes have no factual matrix surrounding it, or there's no factual base there's no factual foundation in which they complaints actually rely on, then after it, they go ham, and then after they say that you either Uncle Tom, um, you're smart, you're a clever black, or whatever other type of insult they try to swirl at your in your direction, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating when you have a government that's doing what the ANC is doing now, and then you still have a populace which is as sensitive as a 3-month-old baby when it comes to certain issues. When it comes to actually discussing issues which are of critical importance, how important it is to have, how important it is to have a 50 pass mark at a high school or a primary school. For you to pass a matric, you must have a 50 pass. It's if it's not, it's fraud. That matric certificate is fraud. But yet, people feel like we should be allowing people to pass because the situation at home is not good. Well, bro, he's not gonna get hired anyway. So why not just put him to the grinder and then let him fight that, so that he's prepared when he has to go on to bigger and better things. So it's difficult to really assist the black community when it's full of people who are sensitive, who always want to be mollycoddled, and who want to remain a protected group. That's the problem. Because when you're a protected group, you essentially put yourself in a bubble, and it just shows how and if you've seen, it's very difficult to it's very difficult for people of other races to really how do I say, not connect, but really befriend people from our race and really assist, is because they're walking on eggshells around us. If you say one thing, then it's over for you. And it seems as though even people in those minority races believe the same thing. And so you'll see people like, fuck, I forgot her name, she just slipped my name. Mpofu off is white mother. I don't know what's that lady's name. I forgot her name, but she's one of the craziest ladies I've actually heard speak about race. She sounds like that lady who um, who wrote a book about white privilege in the U.S. I forgot what her name is, but she essentially
Robin
said that.
D'Angelo.
Yes, 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 and yeah, she had some crazy theories on white privilege and stuff like that. So it becomes, and then after that, there's also the theatrics. You know what I mean? The EFF trashing a store because They actually, because they assume that the company is racist. You know what I mean? We focus on those type of things as opposed to getting kids the education that they require so that they can pull themselves and their families out of poverty. So that's the difficulty with dealing with a protected group is that you find so many you have to deal with the theatrics before you even deal with the core issues, and that's the problem.
Do you guys think that if ANC was not in power, that this black privilege and everything that Nzuzu just spoke about would, I don't want to say like disappear, but I mean, in a way, get better, if I can put it that way? Dumo?
Okay, I'll start. Before I answer, I just want to make one concession to Nzuzo quickly. Um, you know that situation with the banks and giving loans? Um, there is one situation where white people will have privilege in getting loans. It's when the bank says we're giving you this loan because you're white. That's the only time. And that can also work for black people as well. But anyway, so I just wanted to make that concession. So I'm not saying it's totally impossible, but it's possible, but I don't think it happens. But if the ANC were not in power, would this thing get better? It might. It might get better. But I think that you've got a lot of people who make money off pushing these narratives. Thomas Sowell referred to this as the race industry. So these are people, and he put it in. He didn't mince his words when he said this. He said these are people that study soft subjects at university. They don't learn the hard skills, like for example, like studying law. Okay, they all work people in law, but you know what I mean, like law, engineering, science, and everything like that. The tough subjects, they don't study those ones. They study the soft ones, and then eventually they think they have all the answers on how to solve problems in society. But the problem is that when they look at the engineer and they see his career path, then they look at their own career path and then they can see they don't have much prospects there. So these people are like are very fertile soil for wokeism and stuff like that. So we see a lot of that happening even in varsities today, and even when I was in university. So there will be those people who will make a living off that, and unfortunately, I don't know if it would get better. It could, if more people can see through it. But unfortunately, many people don't see through it, and a lot of them they really going to push this type of stuff, and stopping them is going to be a very very tough challenge, but it is possible. So I would say that it might, but also just given the race industry, the incentives, and really the rhetoric that's being pushed, it'll be a very difficult thing to see, but definitely possible.
Kuketsa, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, Thomas Sowell's Intellectuals and Race, one of the best books I've ever read. Yeah, uh, 10 out of 10 book there. Thick as well. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's exactly that. I wanted to say, Dum, while you were saying there, that it's not that they study soft subjects. They study subjects, well, maybe I'll paraphrase here, but they study subjects where your opinion doesn't matter. So that's anything where, yeah, when it comes to law, there's the constitution. Your opinion doesn't matter. Uh, all sciences, engineering, etc. Your opinion literally doesn't matter. But yeah, the question, would this be such an issue if the ANC weren't in power? Look, I think the ANC is partly responsible or partly to blame for how we actually got here. And I say this because the ANC have a firm belief that someone actually said it on the radio, I believe on Sunday, that they have a firm belief that big business is bad. Big business is bad because socialism. A big business exploits you. Big business basically creates monopolies, etc. There's all of these things, except, right, big asterisk. Big business is not bad when the big business is a state-owned entity. When the big business is the government. When the big business is headed up by effectively a known cadre who donates quite generously to the African National Congress. So based on the preface of this, right? Um, yeah, I'm just trying to find my way back here, but based on this, right, we find ourselves here because primarily because the ANC doesn't believe in anything that furthers any sort of agenda or any progress outside of itself. And this includes the very notion that if you are black and you're not economically empowered, then it is the fault of someone like a big business. So of course, if the ANC wasn't in power, I don't think things would have been as bad. Why? Because we wouldn't have had this much socialism at the very least. We would have had a more freer market, hopefully. And in a free market, people would absolutely live in a meritocracy, not in an environment where your race tends to take precedence over many other things, of course. That's my personal belief. It can be easily thrown aside, of course, if you have, instead of the ANC, someone who is completely more left leaning, completely more authoritarian, something closer to a Russia where you've got the state at the top, followed closely by state oligarchs.
Absolutely. I think I don't know. I think it would tamper down a lot. I would like to think that if the ANC wasn't in power, that there would be less focus on race and all that stuff. But we only know that once the ANC isn't in power. But to get back to the topic at hand, um, I think you guys have definitely given a good case for why it does exist, and the negatives thereof of this black privilege. I wanted to ask you guys though, is there a way to solve it? Because Nzuzu was kind of touching on possible ways to like solutions, but I want to hear from Duma and Koketsu. Do you guys think there's like I don't know if solution is the right term to use, but I mean, clearly when you have a girl at a school saying these horrible things, right? I mean, they were absolutely horrible. Any other person who said this who wasn't black would have been absolutely slaughtered or not slaughtered, but like taken apart. And outrage would have been huge, right? So there is a bit of black privilege because she was able to say those things. Now, that to me is a problem because you have people like this, people like Julius, that are allowed basically to say these things, and you don't know who else is going to hear it and all that stuff, and just cause this whole cascade of evil rhetoric that will live on and on and on. Is there a way to combat this? I mean, I don't think white privilege is a good thing, so let me also make that clear. But privilege is privilege, like we discussed at the beginning of the show. Like everybody wants privilege, and privilege in itself is not necessarily a bad thing, right? So, how do we? So I guess what I'm trying to ask is like, should we be calling out those that are abusing this black privilege, if I can put it that way? Or should it be a case of like, there shouldn't be any white privilege, there shouldn't be any black privilege? It's a very philosophical question here. Duma, you can go first.
Yeah, it's a very tough question. I think the first thing is that I mean I'll steal from Dave Benatar because when he was speaking on a podcast about his time at UCT and how UCT fell, and one thing that he said that when you look at someone, you don't know what they've gone through. When you see someone, you just see them as a person, and we shouldn't try to make judgments based on their skin color, that type of thing. But of course, I mean, we as human beings, we do make judgments based on other things. So let's say, for example, I see a pretty woman, I would assume that she's straight, but I could hit on her and she says, no, I don't date guys, that type of thing. So we do have those preconceptions that are based on patterns and stuff like that. But there's one important element that should be learned is that sometimes those expectations can be not met. You can be surprised by them, and you should be willing to be surprised by them or willing to be open to that. So I think that's probably the first thing. And then the second thing is just that we shouldn't try. I don't think we should try to like eliminate privilege. Like just like if we see like a black privilege thing, we we eliminate. And I think we should just follow a philosophy of like, hey, this person, like that girl at St. Mary, said really horrible things about white people. Is what she's saying wrong? Yes. Should she be punished? That's another story. But if we're going to call her out for doing that, then if a white person says that about a black person, then we should call them out as well. So there should be equal standards applied to people, because the problem is that when you use different standards based on race, you are saying that there's like these fundamental differences between the races that justifies that different treatment. And that could be seen as the bigotry of low expectations. And then you'll have that situation where you have a lefty agreeing with the white supremacist on certain policies, even though their foundations are very different. I don't know if you saw that comedy skit where they showed a hardcore leftist and a racist, and then the hardcore leftist says, I don't think white people should be dating black people, because when white people date black people, they're just doing it to enforce their privilege. And then the racist says, well, blacks and whites shouldn't be dating at all because I want to keep my race pure, that type of thing. So they end up agreeing on a policy, even though they have two different motivations. So we should use the same standard when judging people. So I think ultimately, it starts there. Let's judge people as people, and not on race. Now I know some people want to say, "Oh, but Tuma, what about between men and women?" Now there are differences between men and women, and those differences do have outcomes in many things, like in sports, the choices that women make in terms of careers and stuff like that. I mean, if you look at countries like Denmark, where the social variability is very low, you find that the jobs that men and women take, the variability in that is very high because the social variability is low. But in countries where the social variability is high, men and women tend to take similar jobs. So when it comes to gender, those differences are there, but it doesn't mean that we should treat the genders differently in the sense that they have privilege. We recognize those differences, but we treat them as human beings. But yes, there will be certain outcomes that will occur based on their gender. Yeah, so I think we should just ultimately treat people with respect. Yes, you will have expectations, but guess what? Those expectations, you may be surprised given certain situations. So that's my thing.
All right, cool. Kaketsa?
Yeah, like what Dumo said, my take, three solutions or three ways to solve it concurrently. First one, I would say patriotism. This is something the Americans got right, well, especially pre-Obama, I would say. Have a concept of you are an American. Yeah, you are an American. It doesn't matter where you're from, where you immigrated from, where your ancestry lies, etc. You are an American, and so the patriotism is really what takes precedence over and above everything else. Whether you speak good English, whether you can speak Spanish or not in the South, it doesn't matter. Once you can instill a sense of patriotism, that leads into other things. That is, if we start looking at, let's say, what happens there at SASA, things like grants. Grants then become available to all. Now, I don't agree with grants, of course, but that's a separate discussion. But things like grants, there wouldn't be such a thing as let's say, a socially acceptable black grant or white grant. And I'll make an example out of this 351. Up here, I know people who are not black who have been turned away because of some arbitrary reason, such as, oh no, but you have been employed in the last 3 months. And then they use that as an excuse, and that's how you end up having someone who's of Indian origin not receiving a 350 rand grant, even though on paper they say it's for unemployed people. But yeah, you are not unemployed enough when you're not black. Therefore, they find reasons to not give you 350. So it's things like that. Second parallel thing I would say is, look, I believe a lot of things have actually been addressed, particularly by Judeo Christianity. When you look at the commandment of love your neighbor as you love yourself. It didn't come with terms and conditions. This is in stark contrast to a religion like Islam, where it says, no, you love your neighbor if they accept Allah and Allah's messenger, of course. You don't get that in Christianity. It literally says it doesn't matter who they are. Love your neighbor, not because they believe the same thing as you, but simply because it's another human being. And you'll find this across many other religions as well that typically preach love, tolerance, etc., etc. That's the second one. Then the third one, really, on how to, I don't know, I would say apply effects is just get rid of all these race-based laws. Don't put inside of your legislation something that puts a condition based that looks at someone's skin, for example. That's not how you actually unify people. There is no unity in telling people that, right, okay, before this law can apply to you, we need to know what race you are, for example. That doesn't help the situation at all. You are really just perpetuating the division between blacks, whites, Indians, colors, Chinese, etc., etc. And the same applies even for gender. Why should you know what someone's gender is before you decide to employ them? But we're here because the law says you are scored differently based on the color of your skin and what private parts you were born with and or what you identify as. So let's get rid of that in legislation, and then we'll also now start moving towards a society where your race doesn't matter because A, you are South African, B, you paid attention in Sunday school, and C, even the law doesn't empower you based on what race or gender that you're in.
Fantastic. I agree. I agree with Duma and Kaketsu. I know I'm going to agree with Nzuzu, but Nzuzu, do you want to add anything?
No, no, I think I agree with all what the guys have said. I think that essentially for me it must be removed from the legislation entirely. Wherever privilege or special right is given to one race or one gender or I don't know sexual orientation stuff like that, it must be removed. I think people are best placed to decide for themselves whether they want special privilege or not, but it must never be on piece of paper. It must never be given. It must never be given to someone who has not earned the privilege. And in a sense, I think that um, people must be people must be aware that you don't necessarily. Well, for me, from my perspective, I don't think that privilege is a bad thing, but I just think that when it's being done the way it's being done by the government of South Africa on a piece of paper, I think that it is and it essentially goes in the face of the constitution itself, the rule of law, natural justice itself, and it becomes an issue because South Africans themselves are not the one dictating who to give privilege to. The market is not dictating whom to give privilege to as a result of maybe their hard work, their skills, um, even their genetic traits. That's best to decide who to give privilege to rather than Matamela himself. I don't think in any way do they do it for purposes of trying to better the black man, but they're doing it for purposes of trying to better themselves and their pockets. And they just mirror the apartheid government, but worse in the sense that they can't even maintain the very infrastructure that was given to them by the government. Yet they say they love black people. But yeah, man, that's just really what I wanted to say. Everything else has been said by the gents. And yeah, man, it's a very when it comes to the social privilege, it's very difficult conversation to have, and it's one I don't want to have with a glass of Tanqueray in my hand. I just want to enjoy because nowadays I just have to always be smooching and socializing with people who continue to want to have those conversations. I think that let's have the real conversations, which is what we can do on paper and what we can do for our community.
No, that's well said, actually. Thanks, Nzuzu. All right, guys. Yeah, I think that covers it. Unless any of you guys want to add something or feel that we didn't touch on something with this topic that you feel is important to mention.
I'm cool.
All right.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
All right. Cool. Well, gents, in that case, we'll call it. I want to thank you guys so much for having this discussion with me. Couldn't think of any better group of people to have this conversation with. I really enjoy your podcasts. So, ladies and gentlemen, speaking of which, please go check out Manpatria. The website is linked in the description below, as well as their YouTube channel. Go check it out. Give them a subscribe. They do great things and they have great conversations. I think you guys. Well, Duma, you take the floor here and just tell people how often you do that podcast and where people can find you.
Yeah, we do the podcast every. Oh, sorry, I muted myself. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I wanted to switch the thing, but the arrows didn't pop up. But anyway, we have a podcast every Monday at 7 o'clock. It's live, and you can also listen to it post stream as well. We also have it on audio versions as well. But so you can just check out our YouTube channel. But if you want to see everything, just go to manpatria.com, and that's just like the Manpatria universe. So head over there, you'll get swamped. We got like over, I think, 100 hours of content now. I think it is 100 hours. I could be wrong. I mean, if one episode is 1 hour, yes, over 100 hours. So yeah. So please, binge that, not Netflix. Thank you.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, do go check them out. I really enjoy their content. It's great stuff, and they have very interesting conversations as well. So please go check them out. Koketsu and Nzuzu, give the audience, if there's anything else or any other platform you guys want to promote yourselves and just say, like, come follow me. I have linked everyone's Twitter feed or Twitter profile rather in the description. So Dumo, Koketsu, and Nzuzu, you guys can go in the description and follow them on Twitter. But is there anywhere else people can find you, Koketsu?
For now, we're keeping it real on that Twitter timeline until further notice. I'm still working on big things, so yeah, that'll come out soon. But when it's ready, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so yeah, I do take my time. But when the time comes, you will know about it. So yeah, check me out on Twitter. Drop me a DM anytime. I do respond to DMs, except for the forex traders and to the ladies who are trying to trap me into foreign trading. Also, I'm not single, so I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, that's a real problem. In Zuzu, where can people find you?
Yeah, man, you can find me on Twitter, as well as Instagram. I'm not necessarily active that much. But yeah, you can find me on those channels as well. And also, find me on my page as well every Monday. And yeah, man, I hope to see you guys on the comment section having fun and asking your various questions to us. And yeah, man, if you guys also want to catch me, I do work for a law firm in Victoria. I've been putting partners. If you guys want the assistance, legal assistance, man, catch me on that flip. I will give you more information on my page. But if you want information, you can uh, email me on Zuzokati, Zuzo, KHATHI 27 at gmail.com. So yeah, man, if you want any assistance, please, man, hit me up. But nonetheless, man, I hope you guys have a great week. And thank you, Joe, for having me on the show.
It's been a pleasure, guys. Thanks once again for giving me an hour of your time and having this great conversation. Dumo, thank you so much for giving me 2 hours of your time and being a co-host, the first ever co-host on the Joe Emilio Show. It was great having you, my friend. It was a great conversation. I strongly encourage everybody to rewatch this from the beginning. This 1 hour segment will be released on its own in the coming week, and I'll send you guys the link if you guys want to share it and let people dive into this question: does black privilege exist? Spoiler alert, yes it does, apparently. Okay. All right, so boys, thanks again. You may take your leave as I sign off. Thanks once again for joining this evening. Peace, and I'll chat to you guys soon. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the Manpatria crew.